First, I'm going to do a setup overview, show you all the buttons, all the features, all the opportunities and affordances you have with this Obsidian setup, then show you how it works. So if you want to change it, you can adjust Dataview queries or metadata menu or any of the other behind the scenes plugins that I'm using. And then in the third section, give you some ideas and personal adjustments that I use in comparing this vault to what I currently use right now. And yes, there is a free template download in the description below. Patrons will have already had access to that, so you can see that inside the Discord server, which is where we talk about all this sort of stuff. So for those of you familiar with me and my channel, I love the canvas view for a dashboard because I can see lots of information at once. I can drag, move things around, and then go into the different files. So say I want to go into the module, I can click on the module and have all of that module information right where I want it. If I click on the back button, it will take me back to the home dashboard canvas, and I can scroll around, and all of these are Dataview queries, which I'll go through in the behind the scenes bit in a minute, but you can see I'm showing the upcoming lectures. So this is just one upcoming lecture, that's a file. It's linked to a module file, and then Dataview is calculating how long I have left. And you can see, if I zoom in, there's little icons next to each of these, and that's because of the class they're in. So this is a lecture class file. If I click on the icon, I can then change the class, but that's a lecture, so I don't want to do it. It does give me the option to, though, so I can select any of these classes. I can then change the date. So if this is a lecture I'm going to go to, I can change the date and say it's going to be on the 11th, 12th, 13th, etc. And that will then change the information for this lecture. So you can make a new lecture and add a date, and then I have it linked to the module. And this is an actual file. So when I click here, it gives me the option of all the modules I have in the folders, which depends on your setup, which I'll go through in a minute. If I hold Control and scroll back on my wheel, you can see we've got the upcoming lectures, then the review lectures, which is the same thing, just this is for the lectures that have been completed and I want to review the notes, so they are in here. Then there's active modules, and you can replace this for classes and then modules or whatever words you want, but to me a module has assessments and you turn up to lectures, so you may have 7 or 8 lectures in one module, and then you may have 2 assessments for that module. So you can see in here, same principle as the card over on the left side, but we've got the module which has this little icon. So there's the module class, you can change the class, then add assessments. So when I click here, we've got 5 current assessments, but I only want assessment 1 and assessment 2 linked. Then if you want to, you can write teachers, and you can add as many properties inside of a file as you want. These are just the ones I have set up. And then I have an active true or false. So am I actively engaged in this module, i.e. semester 1, these are the modules. Semester 2 might have module 2, but maybe I'm looking at some research, so I still want access to the module, hence this other modules section. Then upcoming assessments, these are assessments that I'm going to do. So this is a due date, a DO date, something you're going to act on. So I'm going to write this essay then, or I'm going to make this presentation then. But the deadline may be a different day, so I've split these up. You can combine them, it's personal preference. So this is for when I'm going to do something about the assessment, not necessarily the deadline, but you could change that if you wanted. And then underneath all the other assessments, and you can see this no date, there is no action date, so I haven't decided when I'm going to do assessment 1 or assessment 3. I haven't found out when the deadline is for assessment 3 yet, so there's no deadline in there. And you can change the look of this, change the appearance, etc., which we'll go through later on. Then moving further to the right, I have sources inside of my own vault, source 1, source 2, maybe that's a video, a podcast, a blog, or something like that. I treat that as a source of information. Maybe it's just a shower thought, and that comes in here. Then you can see there's this long name, and this is because I use Zotero, and this is a Zotero file. If I click in, you can see these are all the highlights from the Zotero integration, which again I'll cover in a minute. But this lets me see all of the sources sorted by when I created them. So when I add a new source, I just need to come into my home canvas and right to the top. So if I click here, getting back to the home canvas, I want it to be easy. I push the home button and we're right back to the home. And to close out the home canvas tour, on the left, if you do want to use tasks, you can write down any task in any file, in any lecture, any module, any assessment, and it will come up. You can see inside of the assessment 1 file, I've just got tasks in there, and they're things I need to do. And you can see assessment 1 is linked with lecture 1 and module 1. So you can see the links of what assessment is linked to whatever lecture. So maybe lecture 1 spoke about the assessment one, etc., etc. So if I click on the home button, it takes me back to the home canvas. And if I open up the left sidebar, I've got the bookmarks at the top. And at the moment, I've bookmarked the home canvas. Just in case, for example, I'm in module 1 and I want to go back to the home canvas, but I don't want to close the sidebar because this home button is a workspace, not just a file. Again, I'll cover that in a bit. So I can click on home and it takes me back to the home canvas, rather than when I click on the home button, it takes me back to this workspace, this saved workspace. And bookmarks is basically favorites. So you could favorite a lesson, a module, an assessment. It's just a favorites bar, which you can add to, you can add groups to. It's very flexible. And then coming down, we get the files and folders. So this vault is called Back to School. That's the main vault folder because Obsidian is locally stored. It's on my computer. I have a folder for class. This is a plugin specific folder. So assessment, default, lecture, module, and source classes, which I'll go through a little bit later inside the backside and how things work. I then have an images folder set as attachment folder. So again, because Obsidian is local, all of the images need to be saved in Obsidian. So when I click here, this is an image that Zotero automatically imported from the citation. So if I was to actually go to this citation, you can see there's the source. If I scroll down, there's the image. Zotero brought that in, but it needs to be saved somewhere, and that is where this image comes from. And that's why the image folder is there. I then have a research folder, and that's where we have the assessments and the modules. I call it research because when you graduate, when you move forwards, research is everything else. So for me, research is projects. So my newsletter, which I have, or video essays that I do on my second channel, they all go into a research folder, but assessments and modules are also research related. Of course, you can chop and change this as much as you want if you understand how everything works. Again, I'll go through in a minute. Then a sources folder, one of them being content. So this is the videos, blogs, articles, or Zotero highlighted integration points. And then we have lectures as sources, because lectures are just sources of information. They are places you find things. Maybe they're highlights from the lecture, maybe they're sources that someone's referenced, or something that a lecturer has said, or a conversation you've had, or anything like that. It's a source of information. If I go into this lecture, I can then take notes. And if I want to link this note with a research file, I can go bracket, and say module 2. That's the thing. And if you have more research like me, you may, inside of the research folder, have just all the other research files around a topic. So instead of being module for university, maybe you're doing your own research on something else, maybe extended cognition. So you would then link the lecture 1 to extended cognition. Hopefully that makes sense. Moving down to the templates folder, this helps me add new files in with all default information, such as the class and the properties and everything else. So if I go to the assessment template, at the moment, this looks very bland because there's nothing in there. But if I go to the right sidebar, you can see we've got the outline plugin for headings for research. We then have the backlinks plugin, which I actually have the backlinks down in the file. You can remove that in the settings, but that's there. Outgoing links, and then file properties. So if I click on file properties, you can see the class is assessment. There's a date property already there, a module property, a priority, and a deadline property already added inside of the template. Another way to see these is using the metadata menu icon, which actually gives us more flexibility at the top. So when I click this, here are all of those properties, which gives us the option to add dates, move things forwards, etc., etc. So if I click on our home button, come back to home, and now I push my hotkey Control N, it gives me a drop down of all of the new files I could create. So say I want to do a lecture, I can type in the name of the next lecture, push enter, and now because all of these are automatically updated by Dataview, you can see next lecture is currently in review lectures. And I can see there's no date on it, so I'm going to add a date. You could separate these queries and say no date lecture or next lecture, but I've left this the same. So when I push on the icon, I can then add a date in. So let's say this is for the 20th push tick. Now the 20th is going to be added. The date you can see has been added, and now next lecture is in the upcoming lectures, which is 1 week and 2 days away. Wow, did I really put that on the same day? Let's make it a different day. Let's do the 30th instead. So now it's going to be the 30th, and this is going to change to 2 weeks and 5 days. At this point, I'm going to encourage you to download the template. Again, it's free, so you can push buttons and figure out what's going on, use the hotkeys and explore the settings on your own. But getting into the setup, we're going to look at the core plugins because I've turned a few off from default. So I don't use daily notes, so it's turned off because I don't find it useful. The home dashboard for me does everything I need. I've turned off the graph view. Again, I don't find much use in it because there are so many files and filtering for them is far easier, again, inside of Dataview queries for the dashboard. I've turned on the properties view so I can see the properties in the sidebar, right sidebar, rather than in the file because I don't like cluttering up the file. I've then turned the tags view off because I'm using classes in metadata menu. I don't need tags. And then I've turned on Workspaces because that's what I'm using for the home button. Moving to appearance very quickly, you can see I've added in Inter as a default font because I like to see arrows. So when I'm in a lecture, for example, if I push a dash and then use a greater than sign, it turns it into an arrow. That's the Inter font. That's just my preference. And as I scroll all the way down, you can see I've added a CSS snippet. So if I go into the folder, I can then click on the CSS. And you can add as much or as little as you want. All I've done here is I've added in 2 colors and said, I want the black to be this, I want light gray to be this. Then inside of the light theme, I want it to show the light gray on the active line, and in the dark theme on the active line, show black. So this will show or this will show depending on the theme I'm in. And that is this little active highlight line, so you can see it's the black that I've put in. And if I change my theme from dark to light, you can see now it's this grey theme. It just helps me navigate so when I move lines down, I know where the cursor is and I don't get lost. Moving on to community plugins, you can add more, you can remove them, but this is what I would personally use every single time I go into Obsidian. The Commander plugin, when I go into the settings, you can add buttons, which give you lots of options to any of these places, but simply put, all I want to do is add a home button to the ribbon, which is in the side there. That's the button we were pushing. And the Zotero import, I want it to be a button rather than a hotkey, and I've made it a plus. So you can actually change this to any icon that you want, and that's what I've done with the home. I've added a home button. And Commander lets you add any command, so anything that you can add a hotkey to is a command, which means anything that you can add a hotkey to, you can also add into Commander and put it anywhere you want inside of Obsidian. And while we're talking about the button, you can see Home is Workspaces plus Load Home. So the core Workspaces plugin lets us save workspaces, and a workspace is the layout. So at the moment I have 4 core plugins open. If I drag this down, I've now changed the layout. If I drag this one over, again, I've changed the layout. If I change the file or add a tab, move split screen, move the tab down below, or maybe add in a stacked tab, they all change the workspace, and so when I click on Home, it takes me back to this workspace. So all of those core plugins have now been moved back to where they were, and this file is being shown. That's what the core Workspace plugin does. But the Workspaces Plus lets us add the home workspace, so the one we've made, to a hotkey command. So when I go to hotkeys and type in Workspaces, you can see I can add a hotkey to any of these. I haven't added a hotkey to the Workspaces Home because instead of a hotkey, I've added it to Commander. So I've combined the 2 plugins together to give me this button. When saving your workspace, if you come down to the appearance setting and go down to ribbon menu and manage, you can actually hide or show any of those buttons inside of the ribbon. And when you save that workspace, it will save the layout, the configuration of the ribbon. So bear that in mind if you go into a workspace. If you haven't saved the ribbon configuration, then you'll get all the buttons back again. For Zotero integration, I've done a full video explaining how I set this up, and I'll leave a link in the top right, but all I've done here is the exact same thing in there. I've changed the path, so the imported files go to sources, content, and then it uses the Zotero site key. The images go to the images folder, and uses the site key and then puts in the file site key and then puts the image file name in, and I'm using my Zotero template, which comes inside the Vault download. So for Commander, what I've done is I've added a command, I've typed in Zotero, there is the import that I have made, and then I've saved it and added a plus sign to it, which helps me see that, yep, there's a Zotero import. As a quick demonstration, you can see we've got source 1, source 2, and then this import from Zotero. So when I push this button, it says awaiting item selection. If this doesn't come up straight away, it may have been hidden inside of Zotero down here in your pop-up window, so be aware. I'm just going to find a paper that I was looking through recently. Now it's done the import, it will appear inside of my sources, so that's the most recent one. If I click there, you can see we've got the URL, the Zotero link, and then a link to all of the highlights. So if I push on page 10, oh, it's opened it up in the other window. There you go, it's now brought me to the highlight inside of Zotero. So I push the home button, I'm back to the start, and you can see there's the source. And it works because of Dataview queries. So if I go to settings, Dataview, I've turned these on, so I've enabled JavaScript queries and inline JavaScript queries, not because I use them, but because Metadata menu, this other plugin, needs them active. And that's the only setting I've changed. Everything else is default because it makes my life easier. And when we have a look at the files, you can see the home dashboard is a canvas file. That's the one we're currently in. But if I control click on this dashboard queries, this is a different file. So I'm going to open up the outline plugin on the right side, and you can see upcoming lectures, active modules, other modules, and these are the exact same as the cards I have inside of my home canvas. So if we go through, we've got active modules, active modules. You can see it's the same place because what I've done is I've brought the file in, I've gone right click, narrow to heading, and now it's letting me narrow the card view in Canvas to any heading inside of this dashboard queries file. So if I was to add another heading down the bottom, and then inside Canvas, I'm going to control click, drag, drop. I've duplicated the card, but I can right click, narrow to heading, there's the new heading, and now it's being shown here. So if I was to add words in here, you can see it's adding the words inside of the file, and I can also add words in here, and it will update inside of the canvas as well, which is very nice to see. A quick note, if you change the heading, so if I put an S on the end of that, this won't update inside of Obsidian all the way through. So if I remove the S, then it will go, oh yeah, I can find it. So what you need to do is right click, rename this heading, then push an S, save it, and now that updates all the links inside of Obsidian, and it can figure itself out. Similar when you're changing block IDs, but that's a whole other conversation. So I'm going to delete that card, delete those lines because I don't need them. I did that with Control D, nice shortcut. Push the home button to take me back here. And before I go to metadata menu, which I've done an extensive video on before, I'll leave a link in the top right for that. These are two smaller plugins that I highly recommend you use. URL into selection, it does exactly what you think it does. If, for example, I have text here and I want to add a link to it, traditionally you'd have to add brackets and loads of other things, or when you paste a link in, it would then paste it in like this. So you can see you've got the first brackets. If I zoom in, you'll be able to see it easier. You've got the first brackets. That was controlled scroll with my mouse wheel, just for reference. So you've got the brackets, you've got the name of the thing, then you've got the link, and all. It's just not easy to do it this way, especially when you're copying timestamps from videos. So the plugin lets you highlight, then paste. You can see now I've typed the words and the link is already there. And what I do personally is use this for linking video timestamps. So let's say I'm watching a video. For reference, this is my second channel. It's all about video essays on educational science, the stuff I research. But if I've got a note, so say I'm writing a note and I really like this timestamp, I can right click, copy video URL at current time, triple click to highlight the entire line, paste, and now because of the plugin, I now have a timestamp linked to the note. And that's something I do with literally all of my YouTube videos that I watch. And plugin update tracker is another small one that just gives you a little icon down the bottom. You can see here, all plugins up to date. So if there is a plugin update that needs to be done for community plugins, it tells me, because there's no other way to find out whether you need a plugin unless you go into the settings, go to community plugins, and then say check for updates, which to me, I'm not going to remember to do that. I'd much rather have a red cross saying, hey, you need to update this, and then I do. So, to metadata menu, this is a plugin that has far more features that I can cover here, but simply put, we have a folder of classes, and that's the class folder. I have an alias called class. You can call this what you want, I think. The default is file class. I just keep it as class because it's simple, easy. And then global file class. So any file that I add gets this. Whoa, I'm really zoomed in. Let's zoom the text out a bit because that's a bit too much for me. Control scroll wheel again. So, what is this? If I click onto the file, you can see codey gobbledygook. I don't want to have to deal with that. So there's actually a nice interface where I click the button and it comes into this metadata menu interface specifically for a class. If you go into the sidebar, because these are class files, I can click into the lecture icon, and this is the lecture class file settings. So in the table view, it shows you all the files that have that class. So these are all the lectures. These are the properties. So this is the class. If I click on the drop down, there's the option that the property gives me. There's the date. I can add a date. So this is very similar to a database style view. You can add filters and sorts and change all the properties, tick boxes, etc. That's the table view. The file class fields lets us customize and change those properties. So in Obsidian, they're called properties. Metadata menu calls them fields. They're the same thing. So these are the fields inside of the lecture class. When I go to the default class, click on file class fields, there's only one field, one property. And if I click on the pen, I can edit this. The field name, property name is class. And inside of the default, I want to use this Dataview JavaScript function to look for all of the pages inside of the class folder and map it to the file class name. So basically, show me a list of all the files in the class folder. So if I add a file without using my quick add, you can see I have a question mark up there. And that question mark is added because the global file class is added to every file that doesn't have a class. And the question mark inside the file class settings of default is help. So the button icon is help, so I know, oh, this file doesn't have a class yet. I click on there, okay, it's missing this property. I can insert all the missing fields. If there was more than one, I would push this button, but because there's only one, I can push this one, and I can add it in 3 places. Inside as a list in the file, inside as a comment in the file. I personally prefer inside the front matter, which is the properties, so it's not cluttering up my file. So I'm going to click on that one, and what do I want this to be? I want this to be a source. Now it's brought in this other field property. But as I click out, it's also changed the icon. And that's because if I click on the icon next to source, go to file class settings, the file input is the icon for source files. And you can use any icon in here. I'll leave a link in the description to this website and you can see it up there as well, but you can use any of these icons inside of metadata menu. So full customization there. But inside this untitled source file, this URL field property was automatically added. And that's because it's another field property inside of the source class, and at the moment it's just an input property type, so the field type is accept any value, and that's just any value. It could be a template of text or just numbers or words or links, anything you want. Now I don't want this file, so I'm going to use a hotkey, Control-Alt-Backspace, so I can delete the file. It's something I use all the time when I'm testing out, and that can be done hotkeys, delete current file. There's lots of shortcuts like this that may be included in the video. So that's the default file class and a couple of other file classes, and when we have a look into each file class, there are different fields. This, you can see, has a date field type, property type, and when we come in, it then gives us more options to customize this field or property. So accept a date, but date format, you can customize it. You can insert the link path, define certain intervals of changing up or down. There's loads of options here. But something worth noting, you can see here we've got links, and these are done through metadata menu. You can see the assessment 1 and 2 are done using a multiple link property. So when I go to the settings of this field, you can see look for all pages in the Research Assessments folder. That's all I want it to do. However, I've added the Assessment 1 to Module 1, but when I go to Assessment 1 inside of this query, you can see Assessment 1 is linked to Module 1. But that's because of this link. So if I remove it here, so say it's not in Module 1, but is actually in Module 2, you can see Assessment 1 is now linked to Module 2. But up here, Module 1 is linked to Assessment 1. And that's because these are one-way links. They're not bidirectional like a Notion relation property. They are one-way links, so bear that in mind. Which brings us to Quick Add. And again, there are lots of options here, macros and building complex things. I keep it simple, okay? So we've got basically a folder. New file is a folder. In Quick Add, it's called a multi-option, and this multi-option new file has a command or a hotkey you can add to it. So when I go to hotkeys, new file, you can see Quick Add has new file, Control N. By default, this is a new note, but I want it to be Quick Add. And then inside this multi-option, this folder, I then have these template options, these template choices. And when I go to the settings, I can change the name of it. It's just a source. And then I'm using the template path source. So use the source template. I want to add the name in. And when I add the name, I want it to be added to the source content. You can make it open when you've created it. You can make it go to preview, source. There's, again, lots of buttons to push and things to play around with, but keeping it simple, Control N, L for lecture, enter, new lecture, enter, that's it. If I want to go and find it, Control O opens the quick switcher, and then I can search for it. It just happens to be at the top here. Or because the dashboard, it's here, so I can click on that, and now I'm in the new lecture. Of course, we want to change the date, so let's go and change the date to something, let's say the 13th. Okay, let's go back to the home dashboard, and now we've got a lecture in 2 days. For all of these Dataview queries, there are endless possibilities, so I'm just going to go through one to give you a layout, and then let me know inside of the Discord, or go to the Obsidian Discord Dataview channel, and then we can troubleshoot in there. So what I've done, if I zoom in, this is what I've done. I've said show me a table, remove the column ID because I want to add my own, make it a file link so I can click it and call it lecture. Then give me a column module, then give me another column, but get the day, take away today's date and call that days. So that's doing a bit of a calculation for me. Then I want to show all the files from the sources lecture folder. So only show me lectures and show me these properties, and then filter it so where the file day is greater than today. So basically anything in the future. So these are all the lectures in the future, and what I've done in this one is very, very similar, but I've just changed it so smaller than, so review lectures, any lectures in the past. And at the moment, this grabs all of the lectures that doesn't have a date on it as well, but you can add another query, it's entirely up to you, and like I say, you can customize these to your heart's content. And going into my Vault setup, just to give you an idea for some possible options to move forwards, you can see I actually have different colors, and these are mapped to priority. So these are active projects, and the color green is high priority. Then this green is a different priority, and I can see that at a glance, which is the combination of supercharged links and style settings. So supercharged links lets me add a color because of a property piece of information. So high priority, low priority, and style settings lets me customize those colors. My source inbox actually looks for files that are sources that are not linked to research. So there is a filter criteria on the source inbox rather than just show me everything. You can see there's still 612 because I consume a lot of content. Then if we move over to the other side, I've actually changed the Dataview query a little bit. Some of these research files are related to a book that I'm writing. So I've got a tick or a cross depending on true or false. So it's another way to customize the way your dashboard looks. I've also added groups, so you can right click and create groups, so you can group different cards together. You may also notice in the top right, I have a add project button. This is the commander. I've added it to the top as well. So if I push this, I then get a drop down of a new project. So if I click on new, there's a multi. So I have a multi option inside of my default option. So when I come back, shopping list, I can generate my shopping list, which is something else I do, or maybe add a movie. And that's where other dashboards gets involved. So I've got a food dashboard for managing what I'm going to eat during the week, library for books, movie for films, temporary workspace for when I'm working on things, and all of these open up different options. So let's just go into the food workspace very quickly, and you can see there's my canvas. That's my week canvas, and it generates a shopping list for me. Very nice. And there's all the stuff that I haven't updated, but that's one way or another way of using this setup, these combined plugins, to manage other things as well. And I know Obsidian enthusiasts are going to be like, what are your other plugins? So better word count, so when I highlight words, it gives me that word count, because the core one doesn't do that. Book search for finding books. I've done a video, I'll link up top on that one. Calendar for adding calendar notes for the Discord open events. So the live events I do in Discord helps me make those notes. Gone through those two. Footnote shortcut allows me to shortcut footnotes when I'm inside of a research file. Add a footnote, throws me down the bottom for references, and throws me back up to the top, all through a shortcut, which is nice. Language tool integration for grammar and spelling, because mine is poor because I don't pay attention to it, so that keeps me in check most of the time. Long form for book writing and long form writing when I'm doing longer articles, but now I'm just focused on Substack. MediaDB, very similar to the book search, but for movies and other things. Strange New Worlds to help me work out where I've referenced things. Those from Rome, you'll be familiar, but when I reference something or link something, it gives me a number that says, hey, you've been linked once or twice or 7 times elsewhere, and this is just an easy way to find those things. I use Quick Switcher++, so Quick Switcher, the default one, only looks for files. This lets me look for headings as well, and other things, but it's mainly headings I look for. Templater for some of the other workflows I have with books and movies and things like that. And that's it, and I would suggest going to Discord first, because that's where I'm active all of the time. You can put them in the comment section below, but I don't always get back to all of them because YouTube and notifications is not great.